The laughter echoed through the wide training hall as a group of young cadets stood in formation, trying to hide their smirks, but failing badly because their attention was not on the lesson ahead, but on the man who had just entered the room with slow, heavy steps and a tired old coat hanging from his shoulders like a memory. He did not speak or smile or even look at them as he moved to the far side of the room and sat on a bench in the corner like a shadow that did not belong there, and yet had always been there in the background waiting for something. "That's the war hero," one cadet whispered. "His name's Rake," or something like that. The others chuckled and whispered back, "They say he fought in the outer wars, but look at him, now he can barely walk. He's just here," because the higher-ups didn't know where else to put him. Some called him the relic, others said he was just a broken piece of old history, a man with a medal and no purpose. But one cadet, a girl named Leah, didn't laugh or joke or turn away because her eyes saw something different in the way the old man moved. He may have walked with a limp, but there was still something sharp in the way he looked around, like he was measuring every wall, every sound, every shadow. Leah felt the back of her neck prickle, not with fear, but with curiosity. The training began, and the instructor barked orders, and the cadets moved through drills, but Leah kept glancing toward the man in the corner, who never spoke, never stood, never blinked too long. Hours passed, and the mocking stopped as the cadets grew tired, but the silence of the old man never changed. Then, just as the lights flickered above them, and the floor rumbled slightly under their boots, the instructor stopped and frowned, as if something felt wrong, but no words came. Suddenly, the lights went out completely, and the alarm system screamed into the dark, and red emergency lights flashed across the room like blood on the walls. Panic rose fast and sharp as some cadets gasped and others shouted, "What's going on? Is it a drill? Did something hit the power?" But Leah didn't speak because she had already turned toward the corner. The man was no longer sitting. He was standing now, slow but steady, and in his hand was a small object, something metal, something old but familiar to soldiers. He walked past the confused cadets and didn't say a word, but every step he took was filled with purpose. Leah's heart pounded as she followed him without knowing why. The other cadets called to her, asked, "Where are you going? Stay here." But she didn't listen. The man reached a control panel near the side door and opened it with a code none of them knew. Behind the door was a dark hallway lined with pipes and shadows and unknown paths. He stepped inside, and Leah followed. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly without turning around, but his voice was clear and calm like it had seen everything and broken nothing. "I saw how you looked at the others," she said. "I saw how you moved. You're not just here to watch us, are you?" He looked back at her with eyes that seemed older than time and said, "This is not a drill," and then he pulled a small device from his coat and showed her a blinking red light. "Intrusion detected in the lower levels," he said, too quiet for the alarms to catch, but just loud enough for her to hear. She stared at him. "Are you saying we're under attack?" He didn't nod or confirm, but instead turned and moved again, this time with more speed. She followed closely behind, stepping where he stepped and listening with her whole body. The hallway twisted and turned, and the sounds of the alarm faded behind them, until only the echoes of their steps remained. Then they reached a sealed door, and he pressed another code, one that made Leah wonder just who this man really was. Behind the door was a room filled with maps, weapons, and equipment that looked like it hadn't been touched in years, but was still perfectly clean. He handed her a scanner and said, "Take this and watch for movement. If something comes through that tunnel, shoot. Don't think, just shoot." She looked at him unsure, but took the scanner anyway. "Why are you helping us?" she asked. "Because I've seen this before," he said. "I've seen what happens when no one is ready, and I won't let it happen again, not here, not today." She stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. Outside the sealed room, the tremors grew stronger, and something roared in the distance, something not human, not friendly. The cadets still didn't know what was happening, but Leah did. And now she knew one thing more. The man they called useless was the only one who could save them now. The tunnel was tight and dark with wires above and dust on the floor, and Leah stayed close behind the man, who now moved like someone with fire under his skin, like each step pushed away the weight of old years and pulled back a part of who he once was. He didn't speak much, only gave short signals with his hand, and she followed without question because she had already seen the look in his eyes when the alarm first screamed and the world shifted, and that look was not fear, it was memory. Outside, they could still hear the distant alarm and the confused shouts of cadets who didn't understand what was coming. But Leah now walked in silence, with a grip tight on the scanner he gave her and her heart thudding in rhythm with each step. He led her through a narrow side shaft past a broken vent and into another control room filled with dim lights and old panels, and a large screen that flickered with strange movement across a base map. "What is that?" she asked, pointing to the red lines creeping across the lower sections. "They are not part of training," he said without blinking. "They are not expected at all." "So what are they?" she asked again, this time softer. He looked at the screen, and his fingers touched one panel, then another, opening a hidden menu and bringing up grainy visuals of crawling shadows with sharp limbs and too many eyes. "They are something from the edge of known space," he whispered, as if speaking louder would wake the more something I fought once before and hoped I would never see again. Leah felt the air grow cold around her, even though the room was warm, because the way he said it felt like a story, half told, like he had buried something long ago, and now it was climbing back out. "Why here? Why now?" she asked. "Because the base is vulnerable and our command is blind, and these creatures seek weakness, like wolves smell blood," he said, and his voice shook not from fear, but from rage. He moved again, opened a locker, and pulled out a rifle that looked older than anything Leah had trained with, and yet he checked it with practiced ease, as if it had never left his side. The lights flickered again, and the screen showed one red mark breaking through a hallway too close to the dorms. "We have to warn them," she said. "We have to go back. If we go now, we'll lead it straight to them," he said. "We need to stop it here before it spreads." "How do you know where it's going?" she asked. "Because I know how they think," he said, and his eyes narrowed like a hunter who has smelled his prey, "because I still remember war." A low rumble shook the ceiling above, and dust fell around them, and the screen showed the red shape growing closer to their section. He moved toward a supply crate and tossed her a small disc. "That's a signal flare," he said. "If I fall, you throw it and run back to the training hall, tell them what happened, and close every blast door you find." "I won't leave you," she said quickly, too quickly, and the word surprised even her. "You might have to," he said, "but I hope you won't need to." He turned then and walked toward the next door, the one that opened into the lower vent halls, where the creature was heading. Leah followed, still unsure if this was bravery or madness, but her feet refused to stop. They moved through another tunnel, this one tight and low with only red light pulsing above, and strange sounds echoing ahead like claws scraping on old metal. Then the man stopped, raised a hand, and pointed forward. "There it is," he whispered. Leah leaned to look and saw something crawling across the ceiling, its body long and armored, and its head twitching from side to side like it could smell thoughts. She raised the scanner and saw the spike on the screen, a warning of danger and of death. He signaled her to stay back and slowly moved forward, rifle raised and steps silent like a shadow with breath. The creature dropped suddenly and landed with a thud, turning toward the sound, but before it could strike, the rifle fired, once, then twice, then again. Sparks flew, and the creature screamed a sound so sharp it felt like broken glass in the ears. Leah ran forward and saw him standing over the twitching form, smoke rising from the barrel, and his eyes full of something she couldn't name. "Behind you," she screamed, and he turned just in time as another smaller shape leapt from the shadows. He grabbed a pipe from the wall and slammed it hard into the creature's side, sending it crashing into a crate. Leah raised her arm and hit the scanner against its face as it came back up, and sparks flew again as the beast dropped. Breathing hard, she looked at him, and he looked at her, and something passed between them. "Respect, trust, fire. You fought like a soldier," he said, and his voice almost smiled. "You taught me how," she replied. The lights flickered again, and the hallway groaned, and he turned toward the next door. "This was just the first wave," he said. "The real fight is still coming." And Leah followed, because now she understood what everyone else missed. The silent man in the corner was not broken. He was waking up. The air was thick with smoke and heat as the door slid open with a loud hiss, and the old war hero stepped into the storage bay with Leah right behind him, her hands tight around the grip of the weapon he gave her, even though it felt too heavy and too real in her arms. They moved together slowly, their backs close to the wall, and their eyes watching every pipe, every shadow, every corner, like hunters in enemy land. He raised a finger, and Leah froze without needing to ask why, because she already heard it too, a soft sound of scrape, and a click like claws moving across the ceiling above them. She tilted her head up slowly, and saw it a shape that didn't belong, a creature long and low with arms too thin and eyes that reflected red light. Her breath caught in her throat, but the old man didn't move fast or shout. He just raised his hand and pointed at her, then at the weapon, then at the beast. "You take the shot," he whispered, no shaking in his voice, no fear, just a quiet command that sank into her bones. "Me," she mouthed with wide eyes, but he nodded once, then turned his eyes back to the monster, as if trusting her completely. Leah had trained for months. She had fired at moving targets and passed her basic tests. But this was not training. This was something real, something alive, something deadly. Her finger trembled as it found the trigger, and she took one slow step forward, trying to control her breathing the way he taught her. She aimed up and waited for the moment. The creature turned its head just slightly, and that was all it took. She fired. The sound filled the bay like a roar, and the creature dropped from the ceiling in a scream of metal and pain, crashing onto the crates below with a crash that shook the room. She stood frozen, her eyes wide and her hands shaking, but the old man stepped past her and shot 2 more rounds into the beast's chest before it could move again. It stopped twitching then, and the silence returned, but the silence was different now. It was heavy with something new. She had done it. He looked back at her and said, "Well done," then walked toward the next door without waiting for thanks. Leah followed, but her knees felt weak and her stomach twisted in strange ways, not from fear, but from the shock of what she had just done. She had ended something living, and it had tried to end her, and now it was gone. The hallway ahead was darker, and the lights above them flickered with soft buzzes as the shadows moved again in the far distance. He pulled her aside behind a broken crate and placed a hand on her shoulder. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Not sure," she answered quietly. "That's normal," he said. "The first time always stays with you." She nodded slowly and looked at the rifle in her hands like it was no longer a piece of metal, but something that had changed her. They heard voices then far down the corridor, panic shouts and calls for help mixed with running footsteps, and something else, something growling. Without a word he rose and ran toward the sound faster than she expected, and she followed close behind. They found a group of cadets cornered near the reactor door, with one of the beasts creeping toward them low and slow, like a wolf hunting sheep. The cadets were holding makeshift weapons, pipes, and tools, anything they could grab, but none of them had the calm or the aim to fire. Leah raised her rifle and aimed, but her hand still shook, and she wasn't sure she could fire again. Then the old man stepped in front of her and took one perfect shot right between the eyes of the creature. It dropped and slid across the floor inches from the cadets, who stared in shock. "Who is that?" one of them whispered. "Is he really just a trainer?" "He's more than that," Leah said, her voice stronger. "Now he's the reason we're still breathing." The cadets looked at him with wide eyes and slowly lowered their makeshift weapons, and for the first time no one called him useless. He checked them for injuries and then gave quick orders like a soldier still in command, and they listened without question. They moved together, now a unit led by a man who remembered war and a girl who had taken her first step into something bigger. As they walked, Leah turned to him and asked, "Why did you choose me back there? Why not take the shot yourself?" "Because you needed to see what you're capable of," he answered simply, "and because I saw something in your eyes when the lights went out." "What did you see?" she asked. He didn't answer, just looked ahead and said, "We need to keep moving. The next attack will be worse." They reached the next checkpoint and sealed the doors behind them, and for a moment there was peace, but only for a moment. Because now they all knew the truth. The base was under real attack, and the only ones ready to fight were the ones who had already looked fear in the face. And won. Together. The steel doors groaned behind them as the locks engaged, and the group stood breathing hard, their backs against cold walls, their hands still shaking from the fight. They survived, but something had changed in all of them, and it was written across their faces. The old man stood in the middle of a room, wiping the blood from his rifle, as if this was routine, as if he had done this 1,000 times before, and maybe he had. Leah watched him carefully, her thoughts spinning faster than her breath, because the others had finally seen what she already believed deep inside. He wasn't just some old soldier dumped here to rot. He was something more, something that still burned with fire. "Why didn't you tell us who you were?" she asked softly, her voice cutting through the silence. He looked up from his weapon and didn't answer right away, just sat on a supply crate and closed his eyes for a moment like he was listening to something far away. "Because no one wanted to remember what I did," he said at last, and his voice was tired, but calm because it reminded them of what they lost. The cadets stood around him, now not laughing, not mocking, but listening closely like students around a campfire, waiting for a story too dangerous to be written down. "We heard stories," someone said, about a unit that disappeared during the final years of the outer war, something about a betrayal. He opened his eyes, and they were sharp again, focused like a blade that had been hidden for too long. "They sent us behind enemy lines to find something that should have never existed," he said. "Weapons, experiments, things that crawled out of labs and never belonged anywhere. They wanted to erase it, so they sent us in without telling us what it really was. We lost half our team before the first night," he continued. "The other half survived long enough to learn what fear really meant." "And you," he was interrupted, "how did you get out?" "I didn't," he answered flatly. "Not really. I stayed behind so the last shuttle could leave. I was supposed to die there, but I didn't." Silence filled the room, and none of the cadets spoke because they understood now that the man before them was more than just a war hero. He was the cost of war itself. The command never spoke of him again. Leah whispered, "Did they?" "No, they gave medals to those who returned and buried the rest in reports," he replied. "I became a ghost so they could feel clean." He stood up slowly and looked around the room at each of them, his gaze firm but not angry. "But war doesn't care about medals or memory. It only cares about who's ready when it comes again." Another tremor shook the floor, and this time the lights flickered so hard that a few bulbs shattered overhead and sparks rained down like fireflies in the dark. "The enemy is not done," he said. "They're searching for something, and they will not stop until they have it." "What do they want?" one cadet asked. "Power, knowledge, chaos," he answered. "Maybe all of it, but they don't belong here, and if we don't stop them, no one will." He walked to a side wall and opened a hidden panel. Behind it was a screen with dozens of red dots, all blinking across the map like a slow spreading infection. "They're moving toward the command core," he said, "and if they get in, they can shut down the entire base defense system." "We have to stop them," Leah said quickly, "before they reach it." "You can't go alone," one cadet added. "We're with you now." The old man turned to them and nodded once, his eyes softening just for a moment. "Then let's make them remember what a real soldier looks like." They gathered weapons, checked ammo, and formed a tight line behind him, not because they were ordered, but because they trusted him now. As they marched down the corridor toward the command center, Leah stepped beside him and said, "I think I understand now." "Understand what?" he asked without turning. "Why you stayed silent all this time," she said. "Because words mean nothing until action speaks for you." He looked at her, and something almost like a smile touched the edge of his face. "You remind me of someone I knew long ago," he said before looking back ahead. They reached the next blast door and stopped as the noise of movement scraped against the walls, ahead sharp and wet like teeth on stone. "Whatever waits for us past this door," he said, "we meet it head on, no fear, no hesitation." The cadets nodded, and Leah raised her rifle higher, her hands steady this time, her heart pounding not with terror, but with purpose. Because the man they called useless had shown them what courage really meant. And now they would follow him anywhere, even into the jaws of death. Because heroes never die. They just wait to be remembered. The blast door groaned as it opened, and heat rushed out like breath from a furnace thick with smoke and dust, and the bitter scent of something burned and unnatural. Inside the command corridor, the lights were dim or broken, and the walls were torn and clawed, as if something wild had passed through, tearing everything in its path. Leah stepped forward, first her rifle raised, and eyes sharp just like he taught her, but the old man moved slower, now his steps less steady, his breathing heavier. "He's hurt," she realized, and glanced down to see red soaking through his sleeve, and a deeper wound near his side where his coat had been torn by claws. "You're bleeding," she said, stepping to support him, but he waved her off. "It's nothing," he said, and then winced as his knees buckled for just a second. "It's not nothing," she replied, catching his weight and helping him lean against the wall. The cadets formed a circle around them, eyes scanning the shadows, weapons ready, but something had changed. The man who led them through fear and fire now leaned against cold metal, his face pale and his voice faint. "You know the plan," he said to Leah, his hand reaching into his coat and pulling out a small detonator. "This opens the emergency override and locks the core from enemy control. But you have to get to the main panel yourself," he added, placing the device in her hand. She looked at him, her heart twisting. "This isn't right. You're the one who knows what to do." "Not anymore," he said softly. "Not today. Today, it's your turn." The words hit her harder than she expected, and the weight of the device in her hand felt heavier than her rifle, heavier than fear. She turned to the others and gave quick orders, her voice clear and steady. "Tara and Bren, cover the right hallway jacks, and Hall watch the rear. I'll go with 2 to the core and secure the panel." They moved without hesitation because they believed in her now, just as she had believed in him. They advanced through the wreckage, slowly pushing past torn panels and broken wires, the shadows around them alive with noise and whispers and the scrape of clawed feet. Leah's pulse was loud in her ears, but her hands didn't shake this time, not even when the first beast leapt from the ceiling and slammed into the floor before them with a roar. She dropped to one knee, fired twice, and rolled left as another came from the side, but Tara was faster and blasted it back into the wall with a cry. "Keep moving," Leah shouted. "We're almost there." They reached the command core doors, now hanging open, and inside the room was chaos, machinery, crushed panels, torn apart, and sparks falling like rain from overhead pipes. In the center, 3 of the creatures circled the control station, tapping on the screens with long, sharp fingers, like they were searching for something they could not understand. Leah didn't wait. She gave the signal, and the team opened fire from 3 angles, catching the enemy by surprise and dropping one of them instantly. The other 2 screeched and charged, one smashing a table aside and the other leaping over the station, but Leah met it head-on, blasting into its chest and driving it back. The final beast clawed at Tara and knocked her to the ground, but Bren tackled it with a metal rod, screaming as he slammed it into the wall again and again until it stopped moving. Leah stood in the center, panting, her hair damp with sweat, her hands shaking again, but this time from relief, not fear. She moved to the control panel, pulled open the emergency port, and inserted the detonator the old man had given her. The screen blinked, and the base systems rebooted, sealing all lower exits and trapping the remaining creatures in sublevels far from where they could do any more harm. "It's done," she whispered, falling to her knees. The team gathered around her, silent and tired and alive. Then came the sound of slow steps behind them, and Leah turned to see him, the old man, still standing, still bleeding, but smiling with pride in his tired eyes. "You did it," he said. "No," Leah answered, "we did it, because of you." He walked forward and looked around the ruined room, the sealed panel, the scorched walls, and the faces of cadets who were no longer children. "You fought like warriors," he said, "like soldiers, not in name, but in truth." They helped him sit and wrapped his wounds, and Leah sat beside him, her hand still gripping the detonator like it was a piece of her now. "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" she asked. "You came here because you felt it coming." "I felt the silence before the storm," he said, "and I knew someone had to be ready." "You were ready," she replied, "but you also made us ready." He looked at her one last time and said the words that stayed with her forever. "Leaders are not born in comfort, they rise in fire." And Leah knew then that this was not the end. It was the beginning of something greater. Her turn had come, and she had not failed. The sun rose slowly over the smoking sky as the emergency lights faded one by one, and the sound of distant sirens gave way to silence, not the kind that brings fear, but the kind that follows survival. The base was still standing, broken in places, scarred in others, but alive just like the people inside it, and at the heart of that survival sat a man the cadets once mocked, and a girl who chose to listen when no one else did. The transport ships arrived not long after the lockdown, and command officers flooded the halls with blinking tablets and fast questions and loud voices that didn't match the quiet that still hung in the air. They found Leah at the entrance to the command core, her clothes stained, her hands scraped, her eyes tired but clear, and behind her stood the cadets she led into fire and pulled back alive. "What happened here?" the chief officer asked, looking around at the wreckage, the sealed doors, the fallen beasts, and the tired faces. Leah didn't answer at first. She looked back over her shoulder at the old man, seated against the wall his side, wrapped in field tape, his rifle resting, beside him his head tilted forward, as if asleep. She walked over to him and placed a hand on his shoulder. Gently, he opened his eyes and gave her a quiet nod. Then she turned to the officer and said, "This man saved your base and everyone in it." The officer raised an eyebrow. "This man is Rake, isn't he, the washed-up trainer, the one who failed command review?" Leah stepped forward, her voice calm, but heavy with fire. "He didn't fail, you did, when you forgot who he was. He planned the defense. He took down the first wave alone. He led us through the dark and taught us how to survive when your systems failed and your orders never came." Others stepped forward to support her. Tara, Bren, even Jex, each telling what they saw, what they did, and how he turned scared kids into a unit that didn't break. The officer looked shaken, unsure how to respond as more data streamed across his tablet, confirming systems, restored enemies, locked out core, defended, all under the leadership of someone marked unfit. Leah held out the detonator and placed it in the officer's hand. "This saved the core," she said. "He gave it to me because he trusted someone would listen and fight, not freeze and out." Behind her, the old man stood slowly, leaning on his rifle, and looked at the officer with eyes that had seen too much for too long. "I don't need medals," he said. "I don't want speeches or promotions. I just want you to remember that experience does not rot, it waits." The officer looked away, ashamed perhaps, or simply overwhelmed, and gave a single nod of respect. "A full recovery team will arrive by morning," he said. "You've done something remarkable." He turned to Leah. "What's your name, cadet?" "Leah Marin, sir." "You'll be receiving new orders soon," he said. "Your actions will be reviewed for honors and command track consideration." She didn't smile at that. She just turned back toward Rake and said, "None of this was me alone." The officer gave a quick nod, then moved on, leaving them with the quiet again. As the hallway cleared and the base lights returned to normal, the cadets gathered around Rake one by one, each one silent, but their faces said more than words. Bren gave him a salute and said, "Sorry for ever doubting you, sir." Tara handed him a fresh field wrap and said, "You're not useless, not even close." Jex laughed softly and said, "Next time just tell us you're a legend before the monsters show up." Rake chuckled once the sound low and rough and looked toward Leah. "You made them ready," he said. "Only because you made me ready first," she replied. The two stood there in silence for a moment, surrounded by the wreckage and the quiet pride of survival, and something unspoken passed between them. Not father and daughter, not commander and soldier, something deeper, something earned. When word spread across the outer colonies that an old war hero saved a base thought doomed, people began to whisper his name again, not as a joke, not as a warning, but as a reminder that you don't throw away steel just because it's old, that you don't laugh at a fire just because it burns low, and most of all, that you never call a warrior useless when they've seen more than you can imagine and still choose to protect. Leah stayed at the base for another week, helping with repairs, guiding the new recruits, and each time someone asked, "Who trained you?" she pointed to the man in the coat who never asked for praise. She never forgot what he gave her, and he never forgot that even in a world full of noise, one voice still believed in him. Because, in the end, it wasn't command that restored his honor. It was a girl who refused to laugh, and a battle that proved the truth. They called him useless, but they were wrong, and now the whole galaxy knew it.